Welcome, everybody, to the on-land training session on how sailboats sail. What makes a sailboat move? Well, the wind. Okay, that's all I have to say, so let's party. This is going to be a basic overview of how the wind interacts with the sails to move the boat. And it's not going to be a deep dive into aeronautics or aerodynamics, excuse me, or hydrodynamics. But I will then tie this in with sail trim, basics of sail trim. Hopefully this will give you a better understanding on your next trip of why you might be asked to adjust the sails. And the obvious, let me state the obvious. Keep in mind, all of this only applies if there's wind. So I think everybody can understand that wind pushes. Even these two guys get it. A sailboat trying to go in the same general direction as the wind would also be pushed, as would the leaves on your lawn. And this was also the case in the bygone days of square rigger boats. They could not sail upwind. So I tried to figure out, well, you know, because they certainly had some triangular sails up in the bow on some of these square riggers. And triangular sails, you may have heard the term lateen rig, which is very similar. It's been around since the ancient Romans. But the only thing I can gather, these hulks of boats like, you know, the Santa Maria or any of these other big suckers, probably they couldn't build the sails big enough. If you look at how many sails are on a square rigger, and those things were not speed demons. So until that all changed, that's why, you know, they had to know the trade winds and crossing the Atlantic. Columbus and the others, they would cross just above the equator and then they would go back across the north. So it was very seasonally timed too, because in the summer you get the equatorial doldrums. So they had to know all that because they relied on the wind to just push and relied on the trade wind. So it could only be from, you know, a general direction. Fortunately, our sailing ships use more modern conveyances. So how does a sailboat make progress upwind? Well, let's look at how wind interacts with a sail. We have our little wind swirls, which of course you can't see, but and it's a little bit of an artist rendering. Don't take it as, you know, gospel physics here, because they wouldn't have those little curls on the end. In studies that show it's just as you imagine, it's a straight line. So these graphics just show the mainsail. Of course, the same principle would hold true for the foresail, a jib, a genoa, any other kind of staysail that we might use up there. To simplify all the discussion, we'll just talk about the main. So the wind blows over the sail, it gets split. Some of the wind travels across the sail on the windward side, and some on the leeward side. Maybe from this overhead view, the shape looks familiar. This curve of a main, does that look familiar to anybody? Anything else in our world that might have that shape?
Like a surfboard?
An airplane wing.
Oh.
Okay. So very similar to an airplane wing on its end. So here we're looking obviously at an end view of just one wing. The lift force is what creates the forward motion when you're on a boat. And I want to point out that, so let me go into the next slide so you can see them now both together. Again, these are artist renderings of what these things should look like. But the idea is that there doesn't have to be a lot of curvature. Curvature helps. So in certain circumstances, there might be more curvature on the upper surface, creating more lift, or in fact, like supersonic planes, they're very flat. But just to demonstrate, here's a sheet of paper. I'm hoping anybody can see me, because right now all I see is Gail.
Oh, I see you.
And the active speaker is supposed to be showing, so I don't know why I'm not. But if you can see me, I'm piece of paper, well, just below my mouth. Notice it lift? Well, that's the same idea. That's how all this works. So this lift force is what creates the forward motion of a boat, or the upward motion, if you will, in a plane. The shape of the curve will vary considerably based on the application. So what are some other places where this shape is used to some great advantage? Well, a propeller blade on a prop plane.
Mhm.
Anybody watch any Formula One race cars, Indy 500, or some of these other fancy race cars, or have a sports car with a little thing on the back on the trunk, sometimes called a rear spoiler? So that's actually upside down from this, because they want to keep more traction, more weight, if you will, on the rear wheels. But the same concept, in this case, instead of lift pointing up on a car, they want to point it down. So all that's good stuff. That's how these airfoils get to be used in many different places in our life. But let's get back to the boat. So if that was the only force acting on the boat in that big direction with that yellow arrow, which way is the boat going to go? It's going to go straight ahead? No, the answer is no.
No.
Ask a question, feel
No.
free to chime in if you think of an answer. No, it's going to go in that direction of that arrow. So we need something else. Otherwise, the boat would not go the direction we want, and it might even tip over. You can find some videos of like little dinghies where somebody forgot to put the centerboard down. They have little, or dagger boards, whatever you want to call them, little movable keel type things. And you'll just see the boat going, they wanted to go that way, but it just slides. Oh yeah. And they put the board down and all of a sudden took off straight into the arrow. It would have tipped over if it was a heavier wind. So back to the boat. Yes, there's still a push component, but while the airplane has other things like a second wing on the other side of the plane, engines, of course, and a tail fin to keep things balanced, boats need to do something else. Actually, two things: a keel and a rudder. Very useful devices. I'm going to talk about them individually. The keel serves three purposes. The first is to keep the boat from tipping over. There's a lot of wind pressure, and you feel the boat when it heels when you're out on a trip. Yep. So without that, a lot of that push is going to, in a heavy wind, the boat wouldn't just side slip, it would be on its ear. So the tipping, anti-tipping, if you will, portion of the device is because there's several tons of lead or some other heavy metal, I think they're still using lead, in the keel. So it's a big fiberglass thing that they fill with lead as a counterweight so that the boat doesn't tilt as far. Okay. The second is to resist the direct wind push that would cause the boat to go significantly to leeward. So in addition to just preventing the tip, I hope you can see my hand. What's happening underwater? Okay, so there's the boat. Here's the keel. The boat wants to go this way, but with the keel, the water is actually pushing back on the keel. So it's preventing the boat from moving as much in that light yellow top arrow, just by the fact that it's in there and it's interacting with the water will make it go more in the forward direction. The third function of the keel is, albeit not major, but it's to act as an additional foil. So that's what that lower darker yellow arrow is meant to represent, that there's some lift component upwind, if you will, a little bit. If you don't grasp that, don't worry about it. The primary function of the keel is the first two items. It may not be a
Can
lot.
I interrupt?
Okay.
So it's not obvious from this video, but this slide, but normally the rudder would be slightly the other way. When you're sailing, it would
Yes.
it wouldn't be center line, but it wouldn't be turned.
No, Bob's correct, because the boats we sail, thanks, Bob. We have, our boats are designed, are tuned, the whole rigging, the sails, all those shrouds, all those wires are set up so that if you were to let go of the wheel, the boat would turn into the wind. And that's called weather helm. That's a safety thing. You can make the boat, if you let go of the wheel, turn the other way, and in some, or neither way. And in some racing boats, they may do that. So the rudder for this port tack view with the wind coming in the direction that is shown from the left side of the boat, the rudder would actually be in slightly the other direction.
Well, my point was that even on racing boats, if you look at the, this will be the opposite way, but ignoring that, you got the keel and you got the rudder. If you kind of look at that overall shape, it's starting, the whole thing is starting to look like a foil.
That's what I was saying.
Right.
That's what I'm
Yeah,
talking about.
okay.
The third function of the keel is actually is lift
Oh,
component.
it's
because
the,
you
it's
get-
the keel and rudder combination.
well, they both do. Exactly. There's actually a fourth use for the keel, and that's to calibrate the depth sounder, but that's another class. So the rudder serves two purposes. The first is simply to steer the boat, but it also, as Bob was just pointing, acts as a bit of a hydrofoil in conjunction with the keel. And when the rudder is not amidships, there's an additional lift force, somewhat to windward. Turn the rudder too much, of course, it'll act as a brake, or you'll turn all the way downwind or just in the wrong direction. The primary aspect of what we're talking about tonight, though, is I want you to focus on the wind on the sail, because that leads to the second half of this little module, which is how to trim the sails, or why to trim the sails, or when to trim the sails. Any other questions at this point? Okay. Let's talk about sail trim. I imagine you know that when you pointed directly into the wind, the boat doesn't go sail. It's not going nowhere. The push effect could push the boat backwards. Who knows? The other standard points of sail are shown here. Of course, it doesn't mean that you can only have these specific points. It's just for nomenclature and to demonstrate a point. The sails won't work until the boat is almost 45 degrees from the wind direction on either side of the wind, okay, from the wind direction. So that no-go zone is from 70 to 90 degrees. How close the boat can sail to wind, how close haul it can get, for instance, varies somewhat by boat and sail design, and one other factor I'll discuss in a minute. But for the points of sail here, note that for close hold, one, close reach, and to some extent even beam reach, the position of the sail orientation to the wind does not change. Okay, now the part of the sail we're actually talking about is not the boom. We're not showing, well, there's a line there, but that's just so we can fill in the color here. We're not talking about the boom. We're talking about one very specific part of the sail. And that's what I'm highlighting here is the leading edge. And this angle, again, this is an artist rendering, to the angle that's made between the front edge of the sail there and the wind is called the angle of attack. But generally, for these points of sail, the sail is properly trimmed when that first leading edge, maybe the first 9 inches or a foot, the first part of the belly, is aimed into the wind. So it's the boat that turns under the sail. Kind of hard to grasp when you're out there and you're turning the boat itself. But from a sail trimming perspective, you want that leading edge. It's tough to show on a beam reach, and the beam reach is kind of in between with the wind and against the wind, so it's not perfect analysis, but close reach and all the way up here, all through here, you want the sail leading edge to be pointing right into the wind. other factors that will come into play are the strength of the wind and so forth. And I think we'll talk about that in just a minute. Yes. Since the wind is variable in strength and direction, even if you just say, oh, we're just going to go close haul to rock haul, there's no romp appeal, set it and forget it option here. You have to be adjusting the sails. In races, you'll see them constantly adjusting the sails, very little bits here and there to get the most drive, is what it's called, out of the sail, the most lift, the most push, or lift. So now the other points of sail, broad reach and running, you'll notice the sail is almost at 90 degrees to the direction of the wind. In this case, the center of the sail, not the leading edge, because it's a push motion from beyond beam reach to running. Running can also be directly downwind. It's just a push. That's all you get. So you'll see sometimes a boat that's going directly with the wind put the foresail on the other side, because if it stayed on the side it was on here, like in a broad reach, it's going to get blocked by the mainsail, which is generally much bigger. So you'll get more speed here. So let's look at this a little bit. Here we have just a quick demonstration of the sail trim. We have, this is a close reach because that's the no-go range. And there's the beam reach. Pretty darn close, isn't it? So the sails doesn't change position. It's the boat that's changing. So when you're asked to trim the sails and you're looking up, you don't want to look at the belly of the sail. You don't want to look at the boom. You need to look at that section of the sail that's about a foot to foot and a half in, the luff of the sail. It's the part of the sail it's called. If you remember that, those of you who took the nomenclature session last year. And one other factor about this is how much you can change the shape of that curve. So when the wind is light, let me just move my notes. There may be a need to add a little belly to this sail. Let me just go back to this for a second. Wind direction, broad reach, and run. You can see, again, the sail doesn't change much in its relation to the wind. So for broad reach and run, the sail's okay. One last topic on wind, and then we'll see if you have any questions from that. True wind and apparent wind. So there are two types of wind. You've probably heard the word true wind, and that is the wind you feel if you remain motionless and the wind blows in your face or blows the leaves. That's the true wind. Nothing else is affecting it, where you're not affected by anything else. But we want to move the boat. We don't want to just stay still and say, oh, where's the true wind? So as soon as the boat moves, the wind you feel is the apparent wind. That's apparently where it's coming from. Just as if you're riding a bicycle, or if you stuck your hand out the window of a moving car. Please don't do that if you're close to the car, and don't do it while you're driving. That's apparent wind. It can add or subtract from the wind velocity that's going to affect the sails. So how do the sails know which is which? Well, in fact, the sails can only be adjusted to the apparent wind. The sails don't know. The sails will feel what you feel. The sails experience the same effect. Telltales on the shrouds or masthead wind indicator will always show the apparent wind, the direction the wind appears to be coming from due to the motion of the boat. And that direction will always be further forward, if you will, than the true wind, because the boat's motion is creating that. The way to remember that is, where would the wind be coming from if you pointed the boat into the wind, but it wasn't moving? It would be coming from straight ahead. So the apparent wind, or if there's no wind at all and you're out sailing and you're motoring, you only feel the wind coming from straight ahead, no matter which way you go. That's the apparent wind. So the apparent wind, we always say, is appears to be coming more forward, from a more forward position than the true wind. And all these devices that just detect the wind, the telltales, as I said, on the shrouds or on the masthead wind indicator, only show the apparent wind. And obviously only when the boat's moving. Most electronic wind displays that now, the console displays and next to the TV screens all at the helm, have ability to switch between the two. And you'll usually see a T or an A to indicate whether you're looking at true or apparent. So I mention this because now that should explain to you this 70-degree piece here, because true wind, the boat can't sail closer to 90 degrees, 45 each side. Okay. But as we just saw, the boat's motion is creating an apparent wind and moving the direction you think the wind is coming from to further ahead. So in fact, you might be able to sail 35 degrees or thereabouts off the apparent wind. And if you look at that wind gauge on the boat, oh, look, we're doing 30, yeah. Well, because you're trimming to the apparent wind. But it's the true wind that counts. So when you're coming about, just remember, you probably have to make a 90-degree turn, because if you try and turn too close, the sails won't fill right away, because the boat slows down a lot as you come into the wind when you're tacking. So it slows down enough that we're not talking about light air, we're talking about general wind conditions, 10, 20 miles an hour. The wind, actual wind, so the true wind, has a greater effect than the apparent wind. So when you're tacking, you're going to lose any benefit or any course designs from the apparent wind until the boat picks up speed again. So always turn 90 degrees and then turn back up if that's the desire. I didn't get into how we change the shape of the sail, because other than the main sheet, or the jib sheet in the case of the jib, we let it in and out. There are a couple of other lines. One in particular, you may hear the term traveler. That's a line that comes from the bottom of the boom and will attach sometimes in a triangular fashion, sometimes just with a block and tackle straight down on a track, somewhere just above the, in front of the cabin top, or maybe sometimes over the hatchway. That's for helping to adjust not just the position of the sail to the wind, but also the shape of the belly. So in a very stiff wind, you want to minimize the amount of push, because a strong wind is going to provide a lot more push than a weak wind. So if we leave a big belly in the sail, you're going to get a lot more of the push and a lot less of the lift than what you need or want. So using these other devices, and sometimes there's a few other lines you sometimes can play with, but those are the two major ones that can help change the shape of the sail to also have it do its best magic in the various wind speeds that we can encounter. With that, I will open the floor to questions or comments or discussions. Don't forget, many of you are on mute.
Yeah. The addition, what you said, everything that you said earlier, the addition of a foresail, whether it's a jib or a Genoa, is merely going to extend. It's going to extend that airfoil, if you will, so that you can get even more power. Is that correct?
Yes and no, to my understanding. The first thing is the foresail. Let's talk about not close haul for a minute, Gary. Let's talk about when you're further off the wind, the Genoa or the jib, the foresail is let out a little further, somewhat like in the picture here. So it's not that close to the main. So you'll have an additive effect, the same lift and push that's happening on the main will happen on the jib. So you definitely have more speed with the jib and main than just the main alone on all but boats with the tiniest little jibs. The jib performs other functions that is not part of this discussion. But the second part that Gary was addressing is actually when the jib or Genoa is closer in. So let's say more with a close reach to close haul. There is some studies that have shown something called a slot effect. And that's actually the wind passing through between the two sails. And I just finished reading about this. What's interesting is at first, experts were thinking, until they did wind tunnel tests, that the wind was speeding up because of a constriction. For those of you with physics backgrounds, that's the Venturi effect. Well, it turns out that the wind is speeding up before it gets there, but it still helps when you're trimming the jib to recognize that there is a wind velocity component that's going to pass through there, and it passing through there more quickly is going to aid the airfoil effect on the main, as well as help push the boat a little bit more. Generally, I don't personally, Gary, I don't consider these two together as acting as a unified foil. There's too much going on between them. And I think maybe if you're really close haul, this is obviously the jib might be way in. You might get a whole boundary layer of airflow flowing across the whole Meshuggah there, but I don't know.
Yeah, so the slot effect has been the predominant theory for 30 years plus. And so you kind of think of the jib or the Genoa almost like an amplifier for the mainsail. It's not the same foil. However, you tend to you really trim the mainsail first so that it's flying right, and then you adjust the jib. And if you're at a close reach or close haul, it's should end up for optimum. It should end up being kind of shaped the same way as the mainsail is, almost like the slot between them is the same all the way up.
Should be a more or less constant distance between the two. Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's some other niceties. I've been on boats and I learned this trick from a club skipper years ago. To get the boat even closer to the wind, excuse me, we've used the Traveler, that thing I talked about earlier, to pull the boom almost directly amidships. Keep in mind that if the boom is amidships, the sail is not. Let me see if I wanted a two-picture boat. No, I don't have. This is the only one with the main and the jib. So the sail's still out there. So moving it there means, well, you say, well, isn't that just going to cause more push because the leading edge isn't facing the apparent wind? Well, the idea is when you pull that in, that you can turn further up and get that leading edge, that angle of attack, back to where you still can get some performance. So that's a little trick. It doesn't work in light air because it makes the sail too flat. And in light air, there's not enough of that lift force that we've been talking about to move the boat. So definitely a lot of changes between light and heavy air sailing, or even just light breeze and windy, days. Thanks, Bob. Anybody else have any questions or comments or discussions? Thoughts? Did you learn anything? And remember, you might be on mute.
I thought it was interesting.
I'm sorry, who's talking, please?
That was pegged. She thought it was interesting.
Oh, thank you, Peg.
I say, this is Martha, and you're helping refresh my memory of lessons I learned long ago, but haven't thought about lately. So thank you.
Okay. I mentioned telltales as wind indicators, and those are the ones that are sometimes with some knitting yarn on the side stay or in a back stay. There's some other indicators that are used to help trim sails, which I didn't want to spend a lot of time on, or any time on rather, but we seem to have a little bit of time. The jib, Genoa, I'll just say jib for convenience sake, will often have yellow stream or orange streamers, rather, along its luff, about a foot in, maybe even a little less, and two, sometimes 3 points going up the luff. And that's to help show if the air is proceeding across the sail in what's called a laminar flow. So it's not getting turbulent. As soon as the sail is not trimmed right, the air will not travel properly across the sail, either inside or outside, the windward side or the leeward side. And you'll see that the telltale on the jib maybe drop or rise up. All those are indicators on telling you which way to either trim the sail or turn the boat. The main, we don't put those kinds of things on. Basically, one of the tricks for trimming the main is once you're pretty close to where you want to be, you let it out slowly until it just starts to luff. And luff means that first 1.5 feet of the sail is starting to get the jitters. And then you just bring it in just a little bit. That's one theory that's usually a good measure of when the main is properly trimmed. Then, as Bob said, you go to trim the jib. If you trim the jib in too far, guess what's going to happen? If this is like here, let's look at the close reach on the left boat here. The main is out here, and somebody forgot, or you decided, oh, I got to pull that in all the way. What do you think is going to happen? What's going to happen to all this wind that's trying to pump through between the two sails? Martha, what do you think is going to happen? Or Christine, what do you think is going to happen?
It's gonna get caught and mess up your mainsail.
Right. The term is backwind. It's actually going to be pushing, because there's no place else for it to go. It's going to try and push this part of the sail, the mainsail, in, which we don't want. And that's called backwinding the main with the jib. And so now you know how to tell when the jib is in too far as well. By the way, that leading edge discussion, the angle of attack applies for the jib as well as the main. It's easier to see in the main because you're sitting in the cockpit. And so those little, we call them jib willies sometimes, or jib telltales, help you visualize where the wind is coming from over the sail, because it's harder sometimes to see the whole jib.
I got a comment. It's just an example of don't estimate the apparent wind angle, how different it is from the true wind angle. In that the catamarans that, the super high performance catamarans that foil, so the hulls are out of the water, they don't ever broad reach, they don't ever run, they don't even beam reach. They're always doing a close hold or a close reach, no matter which way they're pointing, because once they get those boats going, they're going like 30 knots.
They're going faster than the wind, so the
They're
apparent
going
wind is
faster
made
than the
backwind.
wind, right? So they're they are so much, the boat speed is the dominant factor in what direction the wind is coming from. And they have tricks to get the boat speed up so that they can then go the direction that they want. But yeah, it's a whole different league. But
We can't do that with field boats.
don't underestimate apparent wind angle. It can be very significant.
The stronger the wind, the greater the portion of apparent wind to true wind will affect the sails. There's no question. Thank you, Bob. Anybody else?
If nobody has any other questions, then I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you, Carrie.
Good, I was getting nervous. Oh, you haven't stopped it yet.